It was Carl Sandburg who wrote, "And her lips reminded people of deep red roses waiting in the cool of the summer evening." Some summer evenings can be comfortable, while others are sultry, especially when we're in the midst of a heat wave. The humidity can be stifling at times. It can almost be suffocating. It is difficult to breathe, and yet we feel the sensual warmth in every part of our being. And something in a humid night, when heat lightning flashes silently in the distance, can bring us memories of long-ago summer nights spent in the arms of one particular summer love. Hello once again, I'm Don Jackson, with the increased pulse of the heartbeat of the internet. When a man feels weary or depressed or in pain, just stepping into clear sunshine does something to him. I have felt it often. Sunshine is manifestly more than heat and light and invisible rays, even as the whole can be greater than the sum of the parts. It is something subtler, nearer the spiritual, something close to the quick of life itself. It seems to me that the sun has, in some degree, the quality of a patriarchal blessing, a bestowal of that feeling of security that comes through the love of dear parents still living in the old family homestead where one was born and raised. For the sun is truly the birthstead of the whole earth. An excerpt from the writing of Guy Murchie in Music of the Spheres, published by Houghton Mifflin. There's heat, and then there's heat. Add a little humidity to the mix, and you have the type of summer where it's difficult to keep your cool. I've often believed that the concept of a siesta is the civilized approach to living through the hottest part of the day. In Italy, Spain, and so many other countries lining the Mediterranean, many businesses close down in the early afternoon, only to reopen after the heat has let up somewhat. It's too bad that our society hasn't as yet embraced the idea fully. Until we do, the best that you can do is try to get out of the sun and into some shade. Long before air conditioning, this was the only way to survive the muggiest part of the day. You'd string a hammock up between two trees and close your eyes until the sun had moved. Ceiling fans eventually made it possible to stay inside, but their slow speed only served to keep the warm air circulating. It was the best that could be hoped for on a day when the blistering heat made one feel languorous. In an article contained in the July 1990 issue of Glamour magazine, writer Sarah Nelson quoted a woman in Atlanta as saying, "I have this thing for ceiling fans. Maybe it's my southern background," end quote. And you'd be surprised how many music videos there are that feature the slow spin of a ceiling fan. Lovers do more than tolerate the heat and humidity. They actually seem to indulge in the sensual warmth. This is a short piece that appeared in the August 1993 issue of Glamour magazine's Private Time column that makes one yearn for the luxury of a backyard pool, and I quote, "A perfect rectangle of aqua blue, cool, wet, shimmering. 80 feet of pleasure in which to evade August's withering rays." This man-made containment of water, just a drop, really, compared to the ocean, represents the difference between sweltering, sweaty discomfort and pure, quenching rejuvenation. Swimming pools are our salvation in summer, whether for the simple refreshment of dipping your toes in the water while you read, or the continuous cooling as you swim laps back and forth in steady rhythm. By night, pools are infinitely romantic. By day, they can be serene or raucous, depending on their inhabitants. Their particular permeating scent of chlorine summons memories of childhood summers when we happily spend hours on end splashing and diving until our fingers were furrowed and our eyes red. Their elegant symmetry, serene clarity, and simple wetness make swimming pools an oasis wherever you find them. End quote. I'm going to take you to visit a few unusual swimming pool settings as this program continues. If you don't have a pool, one great way to beat the heat is to enjoy a cool drink on the outdoor patio of a popular cafe. And there is also something to be said for a gentle summer rain. Hot weather does keep one in a continual state of inelegance. A line from Lady Russell in the film Persuasion, a line that Tennessee Williams could have put to very good use. If there is any American play that smolders on the stage, then it's the Tennessee Williams classic, Pulitzer Prize-winning Streetcar Named Desire. When Blanche visits Stanley and Stella, she goes for a long soak in a hot tub. She was of the opinion that soaking in a hot bath cooled her off in the oppressive heat of the Deep South. The next time you're in New Orleans, look for 632 Peter Street. That was where Streetcar was written. It was in an oven of an apartment in the back of a funeral home in New Orleans where he wrote Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. One sultry night, I took a horse and buggy ride by the place he called home and could just imagine how he could have been inspired to set his plays in the tropical heat. Characters with names like Big Daddy and Brick and Maggie seemed to go from a simmer to a boil over the course of a few acts. In this intense heat, harsh words are more often than not spoken, tempers flare, and the lovemaking is passionate. One sure way to beat the heat is having the luxury of a backyard pool that I alluded to earlier. It can be an in-ground monster made of cement or a large preform covered in vinyl, a small above-ground pool, or even a child's wading pool. If it keeps you cool and offers a respite from the high humidity, then it doesn't matter the size. Do you remember the magnificent pool behind the Great Gatsby's home? It's where his life comes to an end at the hands of a jealous husband. Who can ever forget the fiasco caused in that magnificent indoor-outdoor pool when Peter Sellers was inadvertently invited to the party? And just imagine what it must have been like to clean up that mess, especially all of those soap suds. Or the rooftop pool on the downtown Los Angeles skyscraper in one of the Dirty Harry movies with Clint Eastwood. From the glorious kidney-shaped ones that adorn the grounds of mansions, with their cherubs and dolphins continually adding more filtered water back into them, to another kind, the one that doesn't attract too much attention, in the Ron Howard film Cocoon. That film was centered around a pool where the alien pods were stored. There should be a whole genre of films listed in the movie compendiums for those grand and glorious pool settings. I remember a very strange, somewhat disturbing film that starred Burt Lancaster. It featured a swimmer who swam the backyard pools of homes as he slowly made his way across the city toward his own home on a hot afternoon. In Videohound's Golden Movie Retriever, it said, a lonely suburbanite swims an existential path through the pools of his neighborhood landscape in an effort at self-discovery. A surreal, strangely compelling work based on a story by John Cheever, end quote. In the July 2002 issue of Victoria magazine was an article entitled The Natural by Darren Eller. Eller writes, and I quote, "It was the first really torpid day of summer, the kind of day where the heat makes your hair lie flat and your clothes dampen and cling. We, adults, kids, and canines, had been hiking for about an hour, and while the trail wasn't particularly arduous, we were wilting nonetheless. Even the dogs who usually run up ahead, impervious to temperature, seemed depleted. Finally, after we crossed a dry riverbed and ascended a small rise, we heard the familiar gurgle of a creek. Relief. Where there's a creek, there's often a bigger body of water to be found, and sure enough, around the bend, Willowy trees opened up to reveal a sizable swimming hole, glittering green in the sunlight. 5 minutes later, I was backstroking across its cool length, gazing up at the hot blue sky. End quote. Much later in the article, Eller continues, and again I quote, "Though I've been a swimmer all my life, I came late, around age 30 or so, but I quickly fell in love with the first one I saw, Fresh Pond on New York's Shelter Island. At the end of a sandy path hidden behind a thicket of trees, there's a rope that lets you swing over the water and drop in. It's vast enough to do laps back and forth in. Since my initiation, I have dipped into swimming holes in places as far away as Hawaii and as near as 2 hours from my home in Venice Beach, California. Each has its own unique appeal." End quote. In a large pool, a cottage lake, or the ocean, sometimes it's refreshing just to lie on your back and float rather than trying to make it from one side to the other. Richard Bach, in A Gift of Wings, published by Delacour, reminded me of a rite of passage involving a swimming pool, a lesson to be learned in a backyard oasis or at a community pool. This is a hurdle that must be conquered first before you can strike out on your own journey in the pools, ponds, lakes, or oceans of others. And I quote, "Remember the high board at the swimming pool? After days of looking up at it, you finally climbed the wet steps to the platform. From there, it was higher than ever. There were only two ways down, the steps to defeat or the dive to victory. You stood on the edge, shivering in the hot sun, deathly afraid. At last, you leaned too far forward. It was too late for retreat, and you dived. The high board was conquered, and you spent the rest of the day diving. Climbing 1,000 high boards, we demolish fear and turn into human beings." End quote. Richard Bach from A Gift of Wings. To contemplate these things demonstrates the power of the elements. There's not a thing we can do to prevent a heat wave, only find ways to live with it. It is the same with any extreme change in weather patterns. Speaking of the power of the elements, this is one of Aesop's fables, the wind and the sun. The wind and the sun were disputing which was the stronger. Suddenly, they saw a traveler coming down the road, and the sun said, "I see a way to decide our dispute. Whichever of us can cause the traveler to take off his cloak shall be regarded as the stronger. You begin." So the sun retired behind a cloud, and the wind began to blow as hard as it could upon the traveler. But the harder he blew, the more closely did the traveler wrap his cloak around him, till at last the wind had to give up in despair. Then the sun came out and shone in all his glory upon the traveler, who soon found it too hot to walk with his cloak on. As in the case with all of his fables, this one has a moral too. Kindness affects more than severity. William Cullen Bryant wrote, "But far in the fierce sunshine tower the hills, with all their growth of woods, silent and stern, as if the scorching heat and dazzling light were but an element they loved. We are going to feel the heat and suffer through the humidity at times during the course of any summer. We need to find ways to keep cool. It's important to keep hydrated and wear sunscreen. Try to stay out of direct sunlight at midday when the sun is directly overhead. always remember to check in on elderly friends and family who may not have the luxury of air conditioning. If you don't have air conditioning or a backyard pool, there are always the city pools and air-conditioned movie theaters and shopping malls. And try to keep cool thoughts. Here's an example from writer Paul Brooks. In a book called Roadless Area, published by Kanafi, talks about heaven. He said that it comes in many shapes and sizes. To the Inuit, heaven is of course hot. To those in the Middle East, it's cool. He writes, and I quote, "But give me a blue mountain lake at the end of a long climb. Frame it with timber untouched by the axe. Fill it with brook trout, deep-keeled, orange-bellied, ready to fly. Let the sun be warm after swimming, and let the nights be cold under the stars. Let the first ray of morning light strike the snowfields of the western peaks. Let the long, clear note of the varied thrush announce the day." End quote. Quite the word picture. Did it cool you down? Charles Kingsley wrote, "Clear and cool, clear and cool, by laughing shallow and dreaming pool." A longtime friend of this program has a very large sailboat anchored along the Florida coast. I've often imagined what it must be like to be able to go out on the Atlantic Ocean whenever the urge strikes, or the high humidity becomes too stifling for you to stay on shore. Let's think cool thoughts and tag along for the ride. Good night, sweet dreams. I'm Don Jackson.